It's the Gator Bowl against Indiana, and it wasn't chosen a minute too soon. Hi, everybody. I'm Marky Bilson talking about the Tennessee Volunteers and also some coaching hires. It has just come out. The Tennessee Volunteers will be taking on the Indiana Hoosiers in the Gator Bowl. This will be on January the 2nd, 7 p.m. on ESPN. Nice showcase game for the Vols against a formidable opponent in Indiana, maybe not the greatest team that you'd find, but I found it more intriguing than what the initial matchup was reported to be, which is the Music City Bowl against Louisville. To me, Louisville is a team that had been defeated by Kentucky. Tennessee had already defeated Kentucky. What did they have to gain or to prove by defeating the Cardinals? Well, not much. Now, a Big Ten team, a surprising Big Ten team, maybe not to the level of, say, Minnesota, but still a decent Big Ten team, taking on Tennessee. Indiana doesn't have the fan base in football that the Vols do, obviously, but, they haven't been to a bowl like the Gator in some time, so you figure a lot of Hoosiers, a lot of Indiana natives will come to Jacksonville, and of course Tennessee always travels well for their bowl games, so you can see why the Gator Bowl wanted this. To me, though, a Tri-Citian, I am a little disappointed. This could have been the Belk Bowl against Virginia Tech, which would have had tremendous interest to Virginia Tech has become the sort of pseudo-rival to Tennessee in the Tri-Cities. Of course, the Battle of Bristol a few years ago, but that's a game that I like to see played more times than it has been. So I want to talk a little bit about that. Matchup, like I said, Indiana doesn't necessarily put lumber in your shorts, but then again, it's probably the best matchup, the most formidable opponent that Tennessee would face, and plus it's a nice bowl game. Of course, the Vols usually get their way in bowl games, and that was proven here because initially it was going to be Kentucky against Indiana, which actually sounds like a nice matchup, sounds like a great basketball game, but you would have, two border states, and I think the fans would like to see that game. There would be some interest among Hoosiers and Wildcats fans. It fell through, though, because Tennessee threw their weight around a little bit, which is impressive, by the way, said, we'd really rather go to a Florida Bowl. At this point, they said, we should have preference over Kentucky. After all, Tennessee defeated Kentucky this year, and are both 7-5. And seeing as how this was not the committee that decided the national championship in 1993, the Gator Bowl agreed with them. After all, Tennessee will bring in more fans than Kentucky in all likelihood. Speaking of Kentucky, hold that thought because something's going on with Kentucky that could influence the Vols. Something else that influenced the Vols, did you see this? Mike Bobo, late of Colorado State, has been named the new offensive coordinator at South Carolina as Will Muschamp desperately tries to save his job in 2020. That's interesting. Bobo does come with a good reputation, but there was some talk that Chad Morris, late of Arkansas, would come to South Carolina. And I think that although Bobo does have a good reputation, a lot of people would have preferred to see Morris come in to align himself with Muschamp to see if they couldn't turn that ship around in Columbia than Bobo, the former Georgia quarterback. Anyway, a couple of coaching changes that have a lot of influence and also impact with the Tennessee Volunteers. First one, Mike Norvell going to Florida State. First of all, that shows me, remember all those rumors that Bob Stoops was going to leave the XFL and go coach Florida State? What happened to them? And that's actually a good sign for the XFL, because remember how with the Alliance, you did have a lot of coaches. Michael Vick, for instance, leaving the Alliance before it even kicked off, and that should have been a red flashing light that maybe everything wasn't so great in the Alliance of American Football. You had coaches leaving before the season. Now, and we can say that maybe the rumor was more a rumor than obviously now a story that had some legs to it. But Stoops staying with the XFL and not leaving for a glamorous college football coaching position. On the other hand, I'm not sure that Florida State is the job that it used to be. There's now more competition, both in-state and for recruits, but as well as out of state, Alabama, and just all the schools coming into Florida these days, trying to take players away from the Sunshine State, put them on their team. So it's a lot tougher now for Florida State to win. There's also talk, the administration going through a lot of different changes there in Tallahassee. So it's not a sure bet that even though Norvell only lost one game with Memphis, and they're going to go to the Cotton Bowl. Whoever would have thought that Memphis and the Cotton Bowl, if that would have been possible, just, how many years ago? Not that long ago, but it's happening now. And can he do what he did with the Tigers, Mike Norvell, down in Tallahassee? Remains to be seen. It is a much tougher job than it was when Bobby Bowden was there, or even, I should say, when Jimbo Fisher started. That being said, some interesting ideas on replacing Norvell from the Memphis Commercial Appeal. One of them was Chris Long, offensive coordinator at Notre Dame. Now, if you're a Missouri Tigers fan, that's who you want. If those names are, the commercial appeal are the only names they're going to be looking at. And I mean, it kind of sounds when you go through these things, the reporter comes out, and of course I'm sure he talks some boosters and, people in the know, but a lot of times you're sort of typing out, names that you think might be a good fit. One of the names that if you're a Tennessee fan, you want to see hired by the University of Memphis, Barry Odom, the old Missouri coach. Historically, Missouri has not recruited well in state. There are 37 players from Missouri on the Tigers this year. I'll let you decide whether or not that's good or not, but historically, the blue chippers have often gone away. And that was a criticism of Barry Odom, sure, and all this. Now, I mentioned this because Memphis, of course, very important for Tennessee to recruit Memphis. And if you look at the numbers, Tennessee puts a similar amount, a little bit more, but a similar amount of players into the NFL, as does the state of Missouri. Give you an example. At the start of 2018, there were 37 players from the state of Tennessee on NFL rosters, 26 from Missouri. Advantage Tennessee? Well, yes, overall for producing talent in the state. However, for the Vols, there's always going to be the Commodores picking off somebody. There's always going to be MTSU picking off somebody. Maybe not in great numbers, but Missouri, they're the only FBS team in the entire state. They don't have to worry about in-house competition. They don't have to worry about Memphis. And although Memphis may not be the SEC, it may not be Power 5, it is home to the players from Bluff City. No, not you, Sullivan East. And as a result, there are 17 players from the city of Memphis, let alone the suburbs. I'm just keeping it to the city. 17 players from Memphis alone on the Memphis Tigers roster. And I got to think that Memphis has been picking a player or two away that would have gone to Tennessee saying, hey, wouldn't you rather stay at home? We've got a good team now, et cetera, et cetera. And that was what Mike Norvell, and for that matter, Justin Fuente before him, were able to do. That's what the next Tigers coach has got to be able to do. That's what Penny Hardaway is doing in basketball, right? Well, if it's Barry Odom, and there are questions about Barry Odom able to keep in-state recruits into Missouri, if he gets the job in Memphis, what does that mean about him being able to shore up the recruiting in Memphis? Still, though, I would imagine that it would be, Memphis has had some very good coaches. I mean, even Tubby Smith and all this coaching the basketball team. I would think, therefore, that they would focus on Chris Long. Boy, Barry Odom does not sound like a very sexy candidate to anybody other than, say, an FCS program at the current time, or possibly an assistant coach. I said hold the thought on Kentucky. Of course, Norvell is not the sexy name that was hired this weekend in college coaching circles. No, that was former Vols coach Lane Kiffin, who is probably the most overrated college football head coach I can think of. And I'm just going to hold this on there. I mean, Ole Miss got rid of Matt Luke. because Elijah Moore was less than classy in the Egg Bowl, right? That's basically the end for Matt Luke. So to rectify this, Ole Miss, you bring in Lane Kiffin. Snarky Lane Kiffin. The man who left Tennessee on probation and everyone thinking that the Vols hostess honeys were sluts. That's who you're bringing in. Should be some interesting moments on the Grove now, I would imagine, but no. I want to tell you about how overrated Lane Kiffin is. And a lot of talk about what he's doing in Florida Atlantic. This Conference USA may be the worst conference of all 10 conferences in the FBS. That's debatable, but think about it. I see Appalachian State in the Sun Belt being nationally ranked, and so you tell me. What did UAB do against Tennessee? What did Georgia State do against Tennessee this year? And you've got the Sun, and you've got Boca Raton. Florida Atlantic shouldn't be that difficult a place to win in the Conference USA, and it wasn't. Kiffin won 18-6 there. But 8-7 out of conference. Now, I don't really expect the Owls to beat, say, Oklahoma, but they're not being competitive with them. And how competitive are they out of conference with the rest of FBS? Under Lane Kiffin, Florida Atlantic was only 5-7 against non-conference FBS foes. That's who Ole Miss thinks is going to turn their program around? Really? Now, the hope for his success is his charisma. The SEC right now is full of Coach Dulls. Ed Orgeron, very good example. And he's not Coach Dull. He's a good example because he's the most charismatic coach in the SEC. And when Ed Orgeron is your conference's most charismatic coach, that's why Lane Kiffin starts looking good to other SEC members. It's also, though, probably why LSU is now ranked number 1 and going to be playing for a national championship, first against Oklahoma, and if they can get past them, the winner of Ohio State and Clemson. Just think about that. So that's the appeal of Lane Kiffin. Now, something to think about in terms of Kentucky and their relationship with Tennessee. One of the names that has been mentioned for the head coaching position at FAU is Eddie Gran, who is Kentucky's offensive coordinator. Now, I think that Mark Stoops could, if it is Gran who gets the job, hire a good offensive coordinator. But remember, here was Kentucky, who after their loss to Tennessee was 4-5, didn't have a quarterback, had a wide receiver playing quarterback, did not look that good for him. And even you're going to say, well, beating an FCS team and Vanderbilt, how impressive is that, really? And all this. Beat Louisville, who's 7-5, only throwing 2 passes. This was an offensive scheme that was put in, and it nearly beat the Vols, but it was able to defeat the Louisville Cardinals. So you've got a decent enough strategist here in Grant who could get that FAU job, and if you've got a decent enough strategist, look, I never pick Kentucky to beat Tennessee. Never. It just doesn't happen, right? It's as predictable as death and taxes, right? Tennessee's going to beat Kentucky. But that does say that if Grant does leave, okay, Kentucky is that more wounded. Think about it here. But let's just go back to Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin being hired. Again, Ole Miss with their propensity for probation. They hire Lane Kiffin? Really? It's like the man on the oxygen tank with the tubes up his nose smoking a cigarette. I guess they don't have Colonel Reb anymore, but that would be the logo now for Ole Miss football. I'm Mark E. Bilson.